Silver Eye Society.
Welcome to the Silver Eye Society. This episode is going to be about one of my favorite movies ever, The Seventh Seal, an Ingmar Bergman movie. Always slaughter the pronunciation of that just a little bit, but that's okay. This is one of my favorite movies because it's just, I don't know, it has so much beauty to it. It's black and white, which I like the torture of a black and white movie. I don't usually like black and white movies too much. I don't watch many of them. But this is one that you would like to watch in black and white. Just seems right. And I believe the movie is 1957 is the year. It's a little of an older film out of the ones that we've covered so far. But it's such a contrast because of some of the things that we're going to talk about, which is the lack of cynicism in this movie. This is something that we've both spoken about on the podcast before, this kind of cultural cynicism that's growing. This movie is such a stark contrast to the kind of cynicism that also pervades art. So we'll get into that. And this movie is set in the Middle Ages during the plague, which is accidentally apt. I didn't want to cover it because it's set during the plague, but when I realized this is another element to the movie, it only makes it even more important to cover it at this time. Beyond that, this is probably one of the movies that most contributed to my love of existentialism. And I think that's why I love this movie so much, because it was one of my first main introductions to existentialism in art. So this is pretty much an existentialist movie. So we're going to talk about existentialism, and we're going to sum up with finding meaning in life. Very simple, easy topic to debate. So we'll get all of that done, hopefully, within an hour. All right, let's go. Word of the podcast.
The word of the podcast is pest. Pest, a noun, 1550s. In imprecations, a pest upon blank. So in other words, a pest upon your house, you could say.
Oh, so it's like a curse.
Could be. Well, please wait. Plague, pestilence, epidemic disease. From French, pest, the 1530s. From the Latin, pestis, deadly contagious disease, a curse or bane. A word of uncertain origin.
Oh. That's never happened on the podcast before.
I'll leave it there.
Uncertain origins. That's interesting.
It is.
That's so weird. How could they not know? They always know.
There are things that we don't know.
That's true. Look at the Jung podcasts for more about what we don't know. Pest. Why did you pick this word?
Because I was thinking about, people just, not too much anymore, but people would say, oh, you're being a pest. Oh. And thinking about how that is related to the word pestilence. Do you understand? Oh, I guess I should have said that if you're not getting the connection. A pest with pestilence, right? And a pestilence we know being a disease.
I think we've drawn the conclusion there. Very interesting. Well, pest is a good one because it reminds me of kind of talking about the pandemic and the plague. I don't know. It seems, a pestilence. Pestilence is basically a plague, is it not?
I suppose so, yeah.
Yeah, something like that. We're going to get into that. But first, I want to discuss the I don't know, it's kind of like the mood of this movie. Before we get into the actual topics of the movie, I want to talk about the way this movie feels. It's a really weird thing to watch this movie after consuming a lot of more contemporary art, whether it's film, music, whatever it is, because it almost has this level of naivety to it, in the sense that it's so unconcerned with being aware of its own existence. You know what I mean? It's not meta. It's not ironic. And there's something that's so vulnerable and genuine in its approach to these massive existential topics of whether there is a God, whether we are alone in life, how we give meaning to life. These are such massive topics to deal with, but the movie does it in a way that is so earnest, really. And I think that that's why it's one of my favorite movies, is that it's at the same time incredibly dark. I mean, it's about death. It's about suffering. Everybody dies in the movie, pretty much. And sorry, but yet still I can watch this movie and feel better about life. It actually makes me like life more. What an amazing achievement to make a movie that is one of the main characters is literally death, and yet the outcome is such a humanistic. It leaves you with such a humanistic feeling, such a love of life. At least for me. I mean, it'll also give you a little bit of an existential crisis, but that's the process. So what do you think about that? You also noticed the same thing that I did, which is this lack of like cynicism and irony that is so predominant in contemporary art.
I think that part of it is the age of the film, but another aspect is that it's the overlay of it is a Christian. There's a Christian overlay to it in the sense that they're quoting Revelations and the Bible and all that, which for a modern audience is sometimes a little difficult to deal with. But it does have that. It is, to me, a humanistic film. And I think that some of the problem people will have with it is that it's allegorical. And allegory is kind of an old way of telling stories. So each of the characters kind of, to me, represents a aspect of the human spirit. And when that's done poorly, it can be very ponderous and kind of like, yeah, I know, that's the good guy. This is the person that symbolizes justice. But this isn't done poorly. This is done excellently. Masterfully. And so because of that, that's why it works. And that's why you'll still be able to watch this movie 200 years from now. Yeah. I'm pretty certain about that.
Oh, I mean, for sure. It's such a good movie. It's truly one of my favorite movies. It's something that I can rewatch and it kind of grounds me. I love a film that asks such deep questions so directly. And so honestly, without trying to add this kind of like, I know these questions are deep, or, oh, but there's no point anyway. Like, this movie does kind of make that point, because you're right that the characters in the movie are basically, in a way, they're kind of these character-y figures, like almost archetypal. You have the doubting character, the skeptic character, and then there's the theologian, I believe, the one that is trying to steal jewelry off a plague victim that died. That's actually a theologian that originally had told the knight to go on the crusades, and now he has clearly totally renounced all his ideals, and in a time of gravity, which is the plague. And so it's done well, though, because what I read about this movie was that it was Bergman's attempt to kind of parse out this debate between his own different sides on this idea of giving life meaning and what lies beyond. At the same time, this kind of rational skepticism, but at the same time, this desire for something wondrous, something spiritual. And you see that played out in the two main characters. So anyway, I love this movie, though. I love that it has that air of earnestness. It's so stark in the way it presents things, like the idea of death playing chess. It can be almost like a cliche, but it's done so well that it's just timeless. Like it's true. It's deeply true. And so it can't become cliche. Because if it was going to, it would have been already. It's been what? Like many years, 1957.
Yeah, over 50 years. It's part of that is because it's such a huge film that people have obviously made fun of and used it as a way, like Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure uses that character of death as a joke throughout the film. So it's you don't know Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure? It looks like you're faking it, like you're.
I don't.
What? the
doesn't-
the audience is shocked. This is a film podcast, and you don't know the original Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure?
No. It doesn't even...
Pest upon your lack of knowledge of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. No, so yeah. Anyway, the point is that Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure with Keanu Reeves and the other guy, they use that figure of death exactly, playing chess with it, and they make jokes about it. So this film has become part of the popular culture over the last half century.
Yeah.
In many different ways.
Well, when a movie is so... I think there's something about when something is so original in a way and so stark, it becomes... It's like the Kubrick movies. There's such distinct and original imagery in them that the fact that they're able to kind of retell these ancient stories, these ancient questions with new settings, new imagery, makes them immediately enmeshed in the culture. You know what I mean? They immediately become part of the culture. That's my take on that. Yeah. So let's go on to The Plague. This is a part of the movie that I was originally not going to talk about because we're just going to talk about the existentialist aspect of it. But I realized that was foolish. The Plague is a central part of the movie. He didn't set it during the Middle Ages in the plague for no reason. And then I realized we're kind of in our own plague, and some of the same problems that you see in the movie as a result of the plague are some of the same problems that we're dealing with now. So this movie is set in the Middle Ages, and the plague acts as this catalyst for characters to desire meaning and to grapple with death. Because now suddenly they're surrounded by death. That you can't ignore death as easily when it's constantly around you in the form of some pandemic. And you see this in the form of the religious groups that are like extremists that walk around like self-flagellating, which is a great scene. It's a very disturbing scene to me. Because, yeah, obviously like self-flagellation is disturbing, but there's something so horror about it, and the reaction of different villagers when they see it is also what makes it really striking. There's these, I don't know what you would call them, like whatever, these religious extremists, whatever, that are self-flagellating, and they come around and they start preaching end of the world to the different villages that they go to, but you see one of those instances where there's a woman that sees them and immediately falls to her knees, like with tears in her eyes. And I thought that was such an interesting reaction to that scene. And I wonder what it is. I wonder what it is when you see that, what the psychology of that reaction is. What do you think?
I think that for a lot of people want an apocalypse, regardless of if it's actually present or not. And so you're always going to have people in times of tumult that fall to their knees whenever someone tells them they've been bad. That's just a certain part of the population kind of likes that.
Interesting.
And they I think they want to find a posture of submission in any way they can. And so that's that aspect of it. Now, and I won't speak on this long because I don't want to derail the point about the plague. But remember, you also have the main character coming back from 10 years of war. So if you want to make a parallel with our current situation, which I think would be somewhat wrong, because the plague, by the way, the Middle Ages would kill 30% of a population sometimes, 40%. No one really knows for sure, but it's different than what's happening right now in terms of the scale of mortality. But then you also have this person coming back from war in the Middle East. So now if you want to draw some parallels between
that's interesting.
The current situation, I think you can fill in the blank.
Wow, that's true. That's weirdly prescient. Yeah, the plague is obviously worse. Like, let's not get it twisted here. But I think, like you point out, people are very interestingly ready for an apocalypse at any time. And that's something you see recur throughout history. This kind of like, this is the one, like throughout pretty much all of history. And there was also that when the pandemic first broke out, there was a lot of like, this is it. This is going to destroy civilization. And then it turned out to be not that per se. But there are still some effects that you have anyway, regardless of how damaging it is, though I imagine the thing is the severity of those effects is determined by how much damage is done. But one of the things that's really interesting in this movie is that there is a girl that's going to be burned at the stake, and she's blamed for the plague. The priests, I think it's the priests of the time, whatever, they essentially they blame her for bringing about the plague, supposedly because she slept with the devil. I think that's the accusation. And but there's a really interesting exchange between the knight, which is the protagonist, who's like looking for meaning after he returns from this war, and now it's suddenly like life is ending in a new place for a new reason. You know, it's kind of like he escapes being surrounded by death to come home and be surrounded by death again. And he looks to the girl because he says, well, if she's seen the devil, then she should know what lays beyond life. And so he goes to her and she says, look in my eyes. The priest could see him there, and the soldiers, they would not touch me. And so the knight looks at her and says, I see nothing but terror. And I thought that was such a beautiful, perfect scene that honestly the rest of the movie could be bad. And that scene to me is so important because there's the element of blaming other humans who are just as terrorized by the fragility of life as we are. And two, the idea of terror itself and that shared terror. So that's a major element that I noticed in this film is the idea of sharing the terror of life. There's a kind of unity that comes through the universality of death. But let's focus on the blame part, if you don't mind, or you have something.
Well, so two things about that, which is number one, he's looking for the devil because he's making the leap, which is if I can find the devil, then I can find God, because why would there be a devil without a God? See, at some point, if you can't find God, you can look for the devil and then draw the conclusion to say, well, then God must exist if the devil exists. That's actually the true horror is that actually isn't necessarily the case if you assume that there's that a God is not good. But setting aside that little theological point, the other thing that happens there is that girl, while probably simply deranged, she has power. Because if you're a young woman in the 1300s, what is going to be one of your main ways of projecting power? Well, if you are believed to be in league with the devil, you're going to at least scare some people off. You're going to that's your kind of way of being able to, harness some sort of power. Mm-hmm. And I think you see it throughout when he talks to her. She, you can read it a bunch of different ways, and I think they're all valid readings. But she believes she's seeing what she's seeing, and you get the sense that maybe she kind of likes the fact that she's been able to inspire terror. Look, she's a small, frail girl, and she's scared off these armored soldiers and these priests of God and all that kind of stuff. There's some power in that. Now, granted, at the end of the day, it doesn't look like it's going to turn out very well. But I don't know. There's an aspect to that. There's a way to set this in this context of the fear of plague and the fear of war and the fear of life. There's a way to beat that by becoming the thing that is feared. So you can become a witch, and now people will fear you, and that displaces your own fear about, that's part of the larger existential viewpoint, I would think.
Yeah. And you see that weird dynamic there where it's almost as if she's trying to convince both him and herself that her accusation of being in league with the devil is true. And there's something so shattering about him saying, I see only terror, because he doesn't believe her, and it kind of shatters her power then, because it's like, you're just a victim too. And that's the kind of really, really sad thing about this. And it makes me think about the pandemic now and how people have turned upon each other, which is, I think, I've been thinking about it more. And honestly, one of the saddest things, besides the death and suffering, obviously, but there's another sad element to seeing how something like this pandemic can so quickly lead people to dehumanize each other and become really kind of primitive in their desire to punish, blame, and control each other. I mean, in so many ways, the majority of the debate and the discussion and everything about the pandemic has just been, who do we blame? Who do we blame? Whose fault is it? Whose fault is it? It's like, it's a fucking pandemic. Like, it's not any, single person's fault. And everybody is dealing with the same difficulty of living through a pandemic. Some people are just dealing with it differently. And you see that there is a class of people that becomes that kind of, they wear their accusations with a sense of pride, right? Like the kind of people that go to the other extreme of spiting the pandemic. And then there's the other extreme, which is, who can we punish? Who can we blame for the pandemic? And it just turns people into, in a way, it's kind of this movie where you just have the soldiers and the priests against the heathens and the heretics or whatever.
But this is so my favorite character from this film is actually the Squire John. And I think this is the type of film that you watch and that you, because each of the characters represent certain qualities, it's very easy to watch this film and identify with particular characters in the film. And so taking the Squire John or Squire Jones, or however you would say it in Swedish, viewpoint, this is the state of the world at all times. Everybody's got their knife out all the time. It's just this overlay of civilization we have covers it up for the most part. And when things go bad, then all of a sudden the knives come out. So, I don't know. That's kind of how I look at it. Like, it doesn't surprise me that people group up, that people want to blame this person, blame that person. Now, granted, there is legitimate discussion of blame, whether you're talking about the origin of the pandemic
or the mishandling of, protocols and whatnot.
However you want. There's always legitimate discussion of, if for nothing else, so that mistakes don't happen again.
Yeah.
And I'll leave it at that. I don't want my podcast banned in China. Yeah. Anyway, so I
just think that. Oh, are you?
No, please.
Oh, okay. I just, there is a role for identifying where errors were made or where intentional malice is being used. But then there's the kind of blame that's just, it makes me feel good to say that this is someone else's fault. And one of the things I thought was interesting, so that girl is going to be burned at the stake, right? But there's something interesting about the fact that it's almost like a sacrifice. And it makes me think, what is this role, this idea of sacrifice in modern times? The idea that we should sacrifice someone if they are to blame for our hardships. And you see this come out, this desire to blame and to, if you will, sacrifice, but more accurately would be punish, is what we would say. We want to punish someone for causing something. But it has this strange parallel to sacrifice to me, which is something horrible is going on. You're to blame. We're going to almost kind of offer you up as a sacrifice for causing this hardship upon us. It had this weird parallel to me of sacrifice, the girl. Like, obviously that's not what they're saying, but we can't deny that sacrifice is a major thing that many human societies did in times of major hardship, or when they thought there was something on the horizon that was coming that they needed to win favor of the gods from.
Do you want to talk about human sacrifice?
That's what I'm trying to do.
Okay.
I mean, look, I'm wondering, clearly there's some kind of impulse in the human being, not consciously, but this idea that can we exchange something here? Can we barter to ameliorate punishment that has been bestowed upon us by some unknown force or something? You know, like, obviously people feel maybe intuitively like the pandemic is a punishment. And you see that a lot I see that as the underlying emotion that for this desire to blame, because it's like think of it, if you're a kid that gets in trouble or something, immediately the first thing is, no, it's their fault. I can get the punishment off of me by telling you it's their fault. So I feel like there's almost this kind of primitive desire to see if we can barter our way out of hardship by offering up a scapegoat, but more primitively a sacrifice.
Yeah, well, you're right. And that is how human beings act. And it doesn't work because that's fantasy. Now, what you can do, potentially, possibly, offer up an idea. Maybe you can sacrifice a little bit of yourself and find some sort of redemption in that. You know, like, who brutalizes and sets on fire a witch and then thinks they did good and now they're good? That kind of person isn't that person disgusting to you? They're disgusting to me. I'm disgusted by it. I mean, again, that's that Squire John, Jan's, when he's there looking at the thing, he's like, yeah, I thought about just killing them all. And I was like, yeah, I'm with you, Squire Jans. Like, this part of you just wants to, like, all right, there's this, it's grotesque to me. I hate.
That's an interesting misanthropic kind of response.
It's not misanthropic.
I want to kill them all. It's like this idea that humanity itself is the flaw.
Well, okay.
Which there's merit to. I get it. It's not that it's inherently wrong.
It's extraordinarily, it's something I hate about humanity, where they do this, where they take weak people or weak things and they sacrifice it up to something to try to, like, fix their own life. It's just something, I don't like it. I've always hated it, and I don't like it. And also, it doesn't fucking work, and so that's all I'm saying. It's something very much that I am against, and it's why, yeah, that's all I had to say about that.
It's interesting to me. I mean, I agree. Obviously, I think we do have this sense of disgust, but there is something that is parallel to that for some people, which is the terror, the fear. And so if the terror and the fear surpass your ability to humanize the witch at the stake, because you think the witch on the stake is your ticket out of terror, then you're going to be the person that burns the witch at the stake. And my fear is that I see that impulse clear as day. I see some people that I swear to God, they would be happy to put some people up on the stake if it meant, like, redemption or, an assuaging of their fear of the fragility of life. But the thing is that What is the modern sacrifice, right?
See, you're giving too much credit to people again. I'll get real Squire yawns on it. You're assuming that they actually are doing that because they think that it would help, which you could at least understand.
Well, can that be the conscious thing they tell themselves while there's a deeper motive that is not as noble, of course? Because we have to tell ourselves stories that we can live with, right? Unless we're sociopathic. We say that what we're doing is good and moral and for other people. Really, it's a selfish motive. It's a selfish motive. No,
I reject it. Look, I reject it because of this. You can't set a human being on fire. There is no person that can watch a human being set on fire and justify it to themselves. And if you listen to their words saying, "This, I did it for God," and you believe that, then you're abetting the lie that allows for that. And you can say, well, inside their little brains, they're saying that, they know the truth. It doesn't, no.
What do you think it is, though? What do you think it is then? Like, so there was the witch burnings, right?
I think
all the
it's
witch trials
common.
and whatever.
I think that it's common cruelty. I think it's common cruelty, and I think that weak people use opportunities to project cruelty because they're not actually strong enough in their life that if they chose to be cruel, they could do it. That's what I honestly think. That's the cynical viewpoint. That's the Squire Jan's viewpoint. I think that people have that inside of them, and if they can't come to terms with it, and mediate it and balance it, through usually reflection within, then they find opportunities to harm other people, and then they justify it. And maybe I'm wrong. Look, hey, maybe I'm wrong and you're right, and that we could view people who witch burning people, we could view them. Your viewpoint is essentially they're kind of just childlike, and two, they're like hoping to throw up a witch into the heavens to sacrifice. And we could at least say, pat them on the head and say,
no, don't mischaracterize.
I'm not mischaracterizing, but you're giving at least the credit to the person of saying, they believe that the sacrifice would work. And maybe you're right a little bit about that, but I think that there's at least some portion of the population.
For sure,
Maybe I'm being too harsh. Maybe some people do that. Maybe some people just mistakenly make sacrifices because they're afraid. I think there's also people representative in this film of the priests that essentially sent people to war. I think there are people that are very much just love power, and they exercise power, and they mainly exercise power by harming things that are weaker than them, because they know if they actually tried to exercise power against something that is of similar strength, then they'd run into some fucking problems.
I agree.
That's what I think.
I do agree that there's undeniably people that are weak in character, or however you would liken it, but use opportunities for cruelty that are easy. It's cruelty that they know they can get away with. And usually that's going to be under cover of some panic or some group or some mob or something like that, or like some vulnerable victim that they know they can get away with it. And cruelty upon that target makes you feel more powerful, because you can lie to yourself and say that it's somehow because you're more powerful and not because you've chosen a target that is no match. But I do think that there is also a subset of the population that's perhaps larger than that one. I would say they're larger because I think if it's not, that we would have maybe a bit of a darker world than we do. I think the facade of civilization would not be able to hold back if everybody was inherently chomping at the bit to be cruel. I think that what it is that people are afraid. Like, for the most part, I think that we don't even realize how much the average person, just a human being, lives their life in a low grade of terror. And when something like a pandemic, some type of situation that brings that terror to the forefront because now it's more real, when that happens, I think the propensity to act in a way that's irrational, but in service of trying to quell that fear that's come to the front now, and it's unbearable because it's much more conscious. I think that that's when we get those kind of like witch burning attitudes from, you know, it would be your nice little neighbor suddenly has the pitchfork out type of thing. So let's leave that aside, though. The one thing I do think that is important is...
I can't leave that aside. I have to say one more thing about
Okay.
it. And that is, you know, you're probably right. I have a very... I just have a very large amount of disdain for mobs and people that... I've read a lot about the Middle Ages and witch burning and that kind of stuff, and it's a grotesque thing. And I think that, yes, people are afraid, and I understand that. But man, if you read enough history, this whole facade of civilization thing that you have, like, I don't know, man. I hope that you're right and everyone's just afraid, and that we can have a nice world where things are stable and no one's afraid, so we don't do this to each other. But unfortunately, I'm not sure that's so. But again, I hope that I'm wrong and you're right.
Yes, I
This
always
message
hope
to
that
you
I'm
brought
right and you're wrong.
This message brought to you by channeling Squire Yawns.
I think you're
Squire
taking Squire
Young.
Young to another level. But on to sum this section up on a positive note, the interesting thing is that oh wait, one more thing though about sacrifice before we get all positive. Look, I think that there's this inherent desire to barter with reality or something. And I think that idea of sacrifice, it's funny because, and this is the thing that clues me in that we might be not seeing something, which is sacrifice now is seen as such a primitive, foolish, barbaric thing, which makes me think it's actually an ancient human trait. So many of the things that we have this visceral reaction to as of disgust and shame for what humans did in the past is actually because there's like this little kernel of that instinct still within us. And I think that that's why it inspires so much disdain from us. Because, yeah, sure, we're not sacrificing human beings, at least not in this society. People still sacrifice animals. That in religion, whatever, that's definitely still prevalent. So it's not something like the modern human has lost the desire or belief in sacrifice as something that can change their future. We're talking about just do secular humans have no instinct to sacrifice? Or if you have that instinct put into a neat space like religion, right, where I sacrifice some of my paycheck to the church, well, I guess that's charity. I don't know if that's, well, it is kind of the idea of sacrifice, though, still. That idea of tithing, right? You're giving up something that is yours for favor.
It depends. And I think this could go far. I mean, here's the question. It depends on the conception of sacrifice you have. So there is the idea that you sacrifice something in exchange for something, which is really a more pagan idea that you can, and this goes into, and again, I've been doing a lot of reading on Carl Jung and all this stuff, a previous podcast. Some of what I'm saying is influenced by that a little bit. But so there's an exchange mechanism, sacrifice, which is I do the thing I'm supposed to do, the priest tells me to the God, then the God waters the crops or whatever, right? There's that. Then there's a bit of, then there's the other idea of, well, you do it simply not in expectation of exchange, but because you should humble yourself as a earthly entity to the gods or whatever. Do you see?
Like a kind of reverence or something.
Yeah, something like that. So those are two different,
Tithe is more
ideas.
like that. Tithe is the idea that I give simply to give out of the goodness of giving. You know, it's not like, well, I'm going to give a part of my paycheck because God said that's how I get whatever it is, There is this kind of little inherent, I think, obviously, impulse that, well, if I tithe to the church, it brings me good things. It's the good thing to do. But it's not the same, obviously, of like this true barter. Why I am interested in this idea of sacrifice, though, is because so you have the pandemic and all these things, and there's so much of this rhetoric actually that parallels this idea of sacrifice, this idea that we're going to sacrifice some of normal life, sacrifice some of our normal freedoms in exchange for an outcome that we want. And on a certain level, yeah, fair enough. There is a reason for that. That makes sense. We all pretty much were down with that idea at the beginning of the pandemic, which is we'll lock down for a few weeks or whatever so that the hospitals are not overflowed and all of that. Most people were fine with that idea. But this idea of sacrifice to me has grown larger, which is kind of the idea that do you sacrifice your own personal freedoms in exchange for this larger outcome? And I wonder how much that even that conception taps in to something, this kind of like primal desire to barter with reality. Whether
I can tell you, I think, which is look at what people say that they want. This has happened, and I'm not going to get into the specifics of the pandemic because I've avoided it this long, and I'm not going to fucking do it now. Here's what I'm going to do, though, is in a broad way, think about this. The people that tell you to do things the most, in a very high and mighty way, are often covering up the fact that they're not doing the thing. Now, that's just a very simple, I think, human truism. That's all I'm going to say. And you can look over the last year and a half about all of the politicians that wag their finger at you and this and that, and then get caught going to trips to Mexico or going to
clubs,
or having affairs or whatever. Mm-hmm. In the UK, there's several examples of that. So as soon as someone starts being moralistic towards me, see, I don't even bother anymore. I just immediately assume and this is because I grew up in a very hardcore moralistic Christian school. And I learned over time, this is when I was much younger, as soon as someone starts preaching morals at you really hardcore, you just know that they're a fucking criminal. They're fucking criminals. That's who preaches at the loudest. And I'm not saying that all people who say, "Hey, this is a moral thing to do, let's all try to do it." I'm not trying to say all people are criminals like that. But when the person's at the pulpit and they are sweat on their brow, screaming about the evil witches and the evil this and that and the evil that, they're covering their own crime. That's what they're doing always. Almost always. You get some true believers here and there. You'll get some true believers, and they're scarier in a way. The true believers of morality who, actually aren't covering up their own crime. But man, forget about the pandemic, whatever it is. I'm just saying life advice. When someone starts preaching at you really hard over and over and telling you about how good they are and how bad the other people are,
Time to question. The politicians.
No, it's not time to question. It's time to
too much, in my opinion.
Watch your wallet. Watch all of your rights. Watch all of anything you value. Gather it up and get the fuck away from them. It's not. I really believe that. And again, look, I grew up because the school that I went to when I was younger. Like, I'm very aware of these types of people. Mm-hmm. And whether they're using the guise of Christian values or whatever secular replacement someone has found, to preach the word, to evangelize. I do not truck with evangelists.
Yeah, me neither. That's why I support the doctrine of individuality. Be your own evangelist. Leave everybody alone. That's every day we come back to it. Anyway, all right. So let's go beyond sacrifice. I do think that's we've touched on something interesting here, but it's too much to dig into it just now. But I do think there's some impulse of sacrifice there, because look, the point that you're making about like don't trust the evangelist, okay, but there's a little bit of a parallel there between the older version of that, which is you have the priests and the clergy that would tell the villagers, well, this is what you have to do, and this is what, and it was the same dynamic of, well, the villagers are the ones that need to abide by everything, but the priests kind of were behind the scenes, not as pious as the people that actually attended their churches. And in some ways,
be fair,
it may still be the same.
I think we should stick with this for the remainder of this podcast episode, because it is interesting. And I think that, look, again, I sometimes come out a little hard on things. When I do, make statements, I sometimes make them a little too absolutely. But it's just been the same for so long. And there are priests and moralists and people that are ethical that aren't criminals. I should say that. There are people in power that are not criminals, always trying to hide something. There are, but I just think that suspicion is useful for people to have. It's something that I
don't understand who doesn't have it. Is the thing to me, especially you should be extremely suspicious of anyone in a position of power because they have an impulse to accrue power. I mean, that's been always our position as citizens, is to be suspicious of the powers that be because they have this impulse to accrue more power, which is fine. That's why they're in the positions they are, because other people don't tend to want that. I don't want to be the president or whatever, but that doesn't mean I turn a blind eye to the president and allow whatever to happen. There should be this suspicion, but the weird thing is that we turn the suspicion on ourselves instead, and it seems to me that now more than ever people are concerned with their neighbor, which is of course the hallmarks of the witch trials and all that, which is you end up looking over your shoulder instead of looking at the top, which was the witch finder general that originally stoked the witch craze. So you had people in their own towns finding, looking amongst each other to see who they could offer up. And at the very top was the person that said, hey, actually, here's a method by how you can turn in your neighbor that you don't like, or how you can make sure that someone else goes to the witch trials first before you do. And that person was making lots of money. This happened. The witch trials, the witch finder general made money going from town to town, telling the village, this is how you got to find the witches, and I'll help you get rid of them. But the funny thing is that eventually what did him in was the fact that people got tired of paying so much, because it raised the taxes on the villages to pay the witchfinder general for searching for and disposing of these witches. And so people started saying, we don't want to pay for this anymore.
All these people burn themselves out at the end. That's the thing. And you said, well, how can people believe it? Isn't everyone suspicious? I think that more people are now than ever, partially because the ability to have information through the internet, regardless of if that information is true. Subtle point on this: even if you're a wild conspiracy theorist or whatever, it still leads to the breakdown of trust and suspicion, right? Maybe there's something useful to that, even if they're wrong. This is what I always say about the conspiracy theory people, is that even if they're maniacs and wrong about things, I think that there's always something useful about doubt. Now, I grant you that it can go too far and it can become absurd, and it can even be dangerous at times. But in the classic example televangelists, the preachers on television. Throughout the 80s and 90s, it's happened over and over again. These gigantic people taking in millions of dollars, with huge congregations. And over again, what do you find in the end?
They're the worst of their congregation, doing all the things they preach against.
Over and over. How many times is the lesson need to be learned? I don't understand anymore.
Well, that's my fear, is that people, it's a mutual thing, right? Because the congregation gets something from the televangelist. There is this kind of symbiotic relationship there where we're hearing something we want to hear and you're getting what you want to get. My thing is, well, there's what brings you to that situation where you're so easily fed lies by a fraud? And that's my fear in the more general sense, not just, the religious sphere, but why are we so eager to lap up whatever the newest headline is, whatever the newest mandate is, or whatever it is that we're told is the story du jour that we're supposed to run with? I think that, I've never been threatened by conspiracy theorists because I'm a thinking person. And I know that this is actually such a contentious issue. I am supposed to believe that the fact that someone like Alex Jones exists is a dire threat to my life and civilization at all times. And I don't believe that, because I am a thinking person and I can take information and misinformation and look through it, examine it, and think for myself. So my problem here is people get so caught up with, plugging the spout through which the misinformation, the conspiracies come from. And this is the negative approach always to things, which is let's censor it, let's ban it, let's silence it, let's mandate it. Well, how about we take the positive approach, which is make people more able to grapple with misinformation, give people better resources to be thinking people, to be independent thinkers. There's never any discussion of that, of like, hey, instead of, just like topping every time someone says something that's incorrect, why don't we have a population that can deal with this new age of information? I mean, instead of trying to live in the dark ages.
So I'll play devil's advocate against myself, which is to say, I've just spent the last half hour ranting about how people are very prone to joining mobs and are cruel and unthinking, and how people get fooled time and time again by joining mega churches and giving their money to criminals, and how all this. So one could say, against what I've said, well, the reason you have to do mandates and the reason you have to shut down on conspiracy theorists is because people are too fucking stupid not to understand. That's an argument. I think that's more cynical than what I actually think, though, because I think the only way forward is to try to kind of bring the level of people up as best we can. And I'm not giving suggestions. I don't know how to reform the education process to make people critical thinkers. I don't know. But I have a feeling that, right or wrong, that's the route we're going to have to go, because in this new world of information, and it really is a new world of it's unstoppable. It's going to be unstoppable now. Even the technology to censor and stop. I mean, yeah, it can work to a degree, but I don't think that it's going to work.
No,
entirely.
And there's a collateral cost, is what people don't realize. There's already, countless instances of people that absolutely should not have been censored by an algorithm that do get censored by it. And their appeals are not, by YouTube or whatever it is, they're not seen. So, I mean, that's the cost of that game of saying, well, the masses are too stupid to sort through information on their own, so we have to do it for them. Well, you better believe that the cost is there is information that would be that would improve the world, improve people, and it will not get to them. That's how that goes. So my thing is that I'm not willing to pay that cost because some people are too stupid. Okay, I am so sorry for those people. I hope that they make it. I don't want them to suffer, but I don't think that the best route forward for a progressive society, for one that grows and improves and is innovative, is to structure that society around the stupidest people. So that's the argument, right? Is that there are people that are so foolish that they're going to drink bleach. That's what we hear. Well,
right.
I'm sorry. That's not the kind of people that I want to live by laws for them. Like, why should I live by those laws?
Well, and a lot of those stories, when you look into them, aren't. Yeah,
of course. Real. And listen, there's like 300 million something people in the country. If 100 people drink bleach today because they thought it would cure something, that's not even news. Like,
so now to argue against the devil's advocate position that I just took, I would say what happens though is that institutions use the excuse that they're protecting people when they need to make mandates or when they need to censor something or control information a certain way. I actually don't believe for the most part they are doing it out of humanitarian reasons, though I do think that some of them do. I actually do think some of them do. But I actually think what they do is they use it as an excuse to collect power and to basically trade in political favors or whatever it is. That's mainly what I think the way that works.
I think it's so obvious. I think it's dangerously naive to think that it's not that. I mean, again, I think almost every other episode I repeat the quote from Plato that when a tyrant first appears, they are a protector. It's an ancient game, the trade of safety and security for freedom. That's the spectrum. So, I mean, when you inch toward one side, you inch away from the other. This is like, it's a bargain. And we make that bargain already. It's not like we're living in anarchy, total freedom where everything goes and there's no laws, there's nothing, no security. We don't live there. We've already traded freedom for security. But the question is, how far are we going to go? I think we're getting to a weird cultural position where the idea is that safety and security trumps all. And that is a terrifying idea to hold. And I think it is something that people who are too naive to even recognize the freedom that they have and to understand that that is a spectrum that you bargain with, that's the position that they would hold.
Again, I don't like to, I always hate to get bogged down to the everyday and the politics and all that kind of stuff, so I'm not. But I would like to pose one question, and that's this. And I haven't flown recently, but you have. When you go through security, do you still take your shoes off?
Yep.
Okay, and it's
Never
the year
stop.
2021, right?
Yep.
And that was instituted by the TSA in the not 2001, but sometime in the early 2000s, right? Because one
9/11.
guy
Wasn't
who
it
was
9/11?
No, it's not 9/11. It
Oh.
was one inept terrorist tried to create a shoe bomb, and couldn't pull it off. And ever since then,
We have to take our shoes off.
think about this really hard for a second.
It's insane.
Hundreds of millions of people now over the course of, I don't know exactly, 10, 15 years, whatever it is, take their shoes off still.
Yeah.
Because of that. So,
and try to not do it. That's the better part here. Try to not do it. Try.
I didn't know. You don't have an option.
Exactly. That's my point. Is that one instance where there was a justification, right? We had that emergency moment. And that's always the justification for a growth of power and a loss of freedom in exchange for security. Once that exchange is made, try to get the freedom back. Try.
Because
and you'll see.
Because even
then you're the crazy one is what it is.
Well, because even on a less cynical take, here's the thing, right? So So everyone's gotten used to now taking their, and I don't think this is only done in America. I don't think they do this everywhere, as far as I know. I don't think they do.
Which is embarrassing.
It is embarrassing. And so the problem is this. There's no conspiracy here. There's no, it's very simple. People have gotten used to doing this thing, right? And just accepted it. So what political gain is there for any actor who is in an administrative position at whoever enforces these rules or higher up in the political hierarchy? What incentive is there for that person to say, yeah, we shouldn't do that anymore. Let's stop doing that. Because see, then if 20 years from now, Shoe Bomber 2 guy actually figured it out and did it, right? Then you'd have one person to point to and say, they did the rule, and so that's the thing. So see, there's never an incentive to roll back anything and to give, no matter how absurd, to give you your freedom back once it's taken. This is why I always lean towards this, hey, maybe let's not quickly make a bunch of rules and laws. Let's give it a little time, and then work it out. Because there's never a political incentive, or rarely, there are times, but rarely a political incentive for withdrawing a rule which could cause some sort of harm.
Yeah. Because
then you get the finger pointed at you.
Also,
so 20 years from now, you're still going to be taking your shoes off in the year 2050. Yeah. Because everyone understands that, right? Like,
it's so ridiculous.
Because no one's going to
and because no one cares. That's the thing. No one's actually, after you have so many generations of people that take off their shoes, they don't even question it. That's the scariest part to me, is that the desire for that privacy, right? That, I mean, really, it's kind of a silly, undignified process to go through, to take off your shoes in the airport like that and have to walk through the thing and be barefoot or whatever with socks like that. It's just this weird charade of kind of like, I don't like it. There's something, but we don't even really kind of question it. We just go, we just do it. We're tired. We want to get to our flight. We have so much on our mind. We don't think about it. So the desire of the populace itself is not even there anymore, because they just, you put so many things on a person, and like, people just don't care. And after a few generations, like, there's people that have grown up taking off their shoes in the airport. They've never even thought to ask, why do we do this? Never even thought about it. And that's how you slowly drift towards a society that is less free. And I think that personally, for me, the way I see it is that, also, your point about there's no real incentive for people to roll back those measures, but also it's so much harder. Even if there was the incentive, it's always harder to undo power than it is to give more to a government.
No, it's not. It's real easy.
What
Stop.
the fuck are you talking about?
There's no, just someone, whoever makes this decision, I don't know who it is specifically, they can say, yeah, don't do that anymore. That's not a rule anymore. Stop. It wasn't a law.
Monarchy? What are you talking about?
No. Yeah. Well, here's the thing. Now, I'm going to speculate a little bit, and I could be wrong.
Sounds like you already are speculating.
No, I'm not. That was not that. Most likely, the rule to take off your shoes in the airport was not an act passed by Congress. You understand that, right? It wasn't a law.
But it's a
what
TSA.
It was. Yeah, but you know what that is? That's just an administrative unit, the leaders of which are not elected by the people at all, a bureaucracy which makes up a rule. They write a rule down, and then that acts as law. But there's no link between an administrative rule and any sense of a link back to the population itself. Do you see? So, and again, I'm not a lawyer, and I don't know. I'm speculating. We didn't plan to talk about this, but it doesn't require Congress. It doesn't require all of us in the nation to pass a constitutional amendment to stop taking off our fucking shoes at the airport. It probably takes one person who runs the TSA to say, yeah, let's stop doing that. So I don't understand. It's not that complicated, is it? Why is it that complicated?
Well, I don't know.
Yeah, it's
'Cause,
not.
I mean,
I'm
no
pretty
one
sure.
does it though. Why would the TSA person? Because one, again, it's partially the impetus. Like, there's no impetus for the person that works at the TSA to say, who I don't know who this like Lord of the TSA is. First of all, as if there is one person that can make that claim and say we're no longer doing this. I have a feeling it's not that direct. There's probably like a board and whatever, or some crap like that. And I think that they wouldn't even, again, it's that idea of well, it's the TSA. Their whole purpose is let's go through as much of your privacy as we can for safety. So the idea that the organization set up for the intention of shrinking your privacy within a certain jurisdiction for the purpose of safety would then decide to do the opposite of that. That's not even their motive.
No, you're right. But here's the thing. The problem with that...
Well, should we all write letters to like the king of the TSA and be like, hey, dude...
You call it a king of a TSA. There's literally a position that is the administrative head of that bureau.
Okay,
so
I'm
that
going
is
to write
a
a
person.
letter. I'm going to write a letter to that person. And
write
say,
a letter.
Hello, I would like to stop taking off my fucking shoes at the airport because it's silly. How can we change this?
Right, but you won't. Then no one else will. But
Watch it. I will.
Okay,
We'll
all right.
discuss
Then
it on the
I
next
demand
podcast.
right now on the Silver Eye Society. You called
do it.
yourself out. You're going to post it, and you're going to show that you wrote a letter to the head of the TSA, whoever that is. Now, here's the thing: the real problem is this. The real problem is this: that I forgot what the real problem was.
The TSA.
Oh yeah, no. Why are we talking about the TSA
I know.
and the seventh seal? But we already gone this route, so we can end it after this rant on the TSA. Which, hey, good job, TSA. I'm sure you do great work.
They don't.
Here's the thing. Thank you. That was my point. See, the problem with not amending the rule where everyone has to take off their shoes. Here's the problem: that I don't believe that it's fake business. I don't believe the TSA is actually doing anything real.
It is. It's
do you
so
really
fake.
think?
No,
do you
look
really
it
think
up.
the TSA are running out there and like, dude? Okay, wait.
They've caught I think
yeah.
it's like less than 10 people that were actively in the act of committing terrorism or something, or like gonna do something dangerous. Probably. I think it's an insanely low number after like years and years of being in existence. It is the most inefficient and inept organization in existence. It's so useless. But here's the thing. It makes money. That's an entire...
It doesn't make money. It wastes
jobs.
money. It makes a job, sure.
That's the thing.
Yes.
We create these bureaucracies, these organizations, whatever, and hire a bunch of people, and the king of the TSA that I'm going to write to, I bet he's making a lot of money. So he's not gonna be the one to say, hey, we're not really doing anything. I think we should kind of just call it quits here. Like, at least let's downsize. No, all those things do is they're self-perpetuating because there is an interest for their existence and for their expansion. Because if my organization expands, that means my claim to financing for that organization expands. So, I mean, that's why I say that it's very hard to reduce the power of these things because they are inherently self-perpetuating. They're set up with that incentive.
Right. And then what I'm trying to say is, we're going to reach a point as a culture where if we don't see I don't know what the point is, and I don't know how it works, but you can only believe that the people in charge are clowns so far. Mm-hmm. Like, I'd like to be able to go to the airport and think the TSA is doing a heck of a job, TSA, or whatever it is they're doing. And look, I'm sure that they have done something good. I'm not trying to down everybody that works for the TSA. Maybe they have. Now, I've personally, as I'm sure all of us have had our stories, but who cares about that? It's not, I'm not even going to bother. There's no point. But, the reason that these organizations need to reform themselves to some degree is there will come a point where everyone's just like, this is silly. Mm-hmm. You're fucking silly. We're not doing this anymore. There'll come a point. Now, that point will come usually when there's a lot of, and I wish it would be that benign. I would like it to be that benign where everyone's just like, I'd love everyone just to show up at the airport tomorrow and be like, hey, we're just not going to do our shoe thing, all right? And everyone's like, the thing. And then everyone's like, no, just come on, we're just not. And everyone just slowly walks through and the TSA is like, okay. But, No,
dude, you know what would happen, though? Someone would get fucking shot. That's what would happen. The TSA, I don't know. Do they have guns? I don't know. Or the airport security, though, they would bust people up. Because here's the other point, okay? So we've made several points here about why it's so dangerous to expand power cavalierly. Is one, there's no impetus to reduce it. There was another point in there somewhere, or maybe it's like a half point of that one. But 2, or 2.5, is that those laws, those organizations, they're all backed up by power. Okay? So it's not as simple as we're just all going to say, hey, let's not do this anymore. Someone's going to show up and be like, then we're going to force you. It becomes that type of thing. And that's why it's so dangerous to put power behind temporary restrictions and emergency measures, because it's never as simple as just saying, hey, this isn't working anymore. Or like, hey, we don't want to do this anymore. It's been long enough. There's something behind those restrictions. I mean, it's I wonder why people don't consider that, because, okay, so, whatever you have, anytime you have a law or a rule or a restriction, it's within the definition of that thing that it will be enforced, or else it's not a law, rule, or restriction. If it's not enforced, then it's just optional. It's not a thing. So it is part of, whenever those things are made, it's inherent within their definition that they have the capacity to be enforced.
But that's the part of the clown part of it, is that, of course, there's not 100% efficiency of enforcement on any rule or any law. That's just human nature. There never will be. Though, I mean, systems are being built to try to make that more efficient, let's say.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is the point, that when you create laws and rules which can obviously be avoided, and what often happens is that the richest people and the people with the most power are the ones that, even if they get caught, can just avoid any sort of ramifications for it. And it always usually ends up falling on the smaller people. So there's that. That's an argument for, hey, stop making so many fucking rules. The other one is that it creates disdain. I'll give you an example. I don't give a lot of personal stories, but I'll do this and then we'll close out, because I think that we've done this well. A long time ago, I was on a college campus, which I attended, and I smoked tobacco. Some might call them cigarettes. And I was respectable. I wasn't respectable. I was respectful even then to other people not liking cigarette smoke and not wanting to be around it. It's fine. It's, I would never purposely try to put myself in around people. I get it. People don't want it. It's fine. So the campus made a rule. They said, now there's only going to be these little huts. That's where we're putting all the smokers. All the smokers go to the huts, and you're not allowed to smoke anywhere else, right? Well, being a young, rebellious male, and also tired, and I was out of class, one day I went outside the building after having performed excellently in whatever class I was in, and I lit a cigarette and I started smoking. Not in anyone's face. I didn't get in anyone's face and start blowing smoke. I didn't stand by the door and blow smoke at children. I just, I was outside and I was smoking. Well, lo and behold, some little adjunct professor person trots up to me, and the smile, the how much she loved her opportunity to inform me of the new rule. She informed me, you can't smoke here. This is unacceptable. We've created huts for you to go smoke. And I said, very politely, I said, I know, you're right. And then I just continued to smoke. And then she she said, "So you can't smoke here?" And I said, "Well, here's the problem with this. This is true. I really did say this and really did and still believe this. And I wasn't mean. I wasn't yelling. I said, here's the problem. No one's actually enforcing this rule. You can't cart me off to the hut. There's no police that are coming down on me to throw me to the ground because I'm smoking a cigarette 15 feet away from everyone. See, your rule's not real, because if you want to make a rule, you need to enforce it. And there's no enforcement here, is there?" I mean, it just, and that was the end of the conversation. She just left, and I continued, and I smoked my cigarette, and that was it. But it causes, when people make these rules up, and there's always these people that want to, that you could see the joy on her face as she approached me, that she was going to be able to tell a stranger who's not harming anyone the new law, and she has no authority. She doesn't have a badge. She's not the cigarette police, but she's gonna, she makes that badge at home. She has made that badge. She has made that badge, and she wears it, and she just sits around thinking about how much she loves to, tell people about the rules. But at the end of the day, there isn't anybody there to enforce it. And so all it did was make me more cynical about, this is not a real rule. This is fake. And it made me, and look, that person was a professor. I was a student. In a world that's well balanced, I should have respect for that person, because ostensibly they are in a position of respect, right? So by me realizing the fact that this is realizing arbitrary. A whole lot of different, that this is this arbitrary authority and rule and all that kind of stuff. It undermines it. It undermines that person's position. It undermines the position of the entire, if we're really speaking, the entire institution. I don't like that. I don't want that. And I'm not a particularly, I'm not James Dean with the cigarette pack rolled up in my sleeve trying to ride a motorcycle through the campus. I'm really not trying. I grant you, I'm a little
James Dean.
I can be a little,
not confrontational. What is the word? Like,
you
always say it.
Contrarian.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. I don't like to initially, when someone approaches me with something, I don't initially just agree with it. That is possibly a character defect to some degree. But anyway, but I was trying to say that I actually didn't take any great joy of I told the man that I can smoke where I want, and then went and smoked in a bunch of kids' faces. That isn't what I am. But anyway,
no, I mean,
go on. Can we end so I can go smoke a cigarette?
In freedom. Yeah, well, I mean, that's a good point, though. So let's tidy up this section on the plague. But I think that's one of those costs that we don't realize, is that when you overextend authority and power without competence and reason behind it, it inevitably undermines the authority and power. And so it stokes this disdain for authority and power. And that's not healthy for a society, and that's not healthy for our institutions of authority. It's really, it's like that for everything, like for personal relationships. Like if you have a boss that's unnecessarily cruel and always arbitrarily trying to create new restrictions on you, no, actually you need to sign the emails out like this, no, actually you need to keep your desk like this, that doesn't make you want to follow any of the rules at that workplace, even the ones that make sense. It actually starts to make you question all of the different rules that were there. It says, well, if this one is so blatantly arbitrary and based on a personal whim, then what about this one? And what about this one? And that's where you get a danger. That's where you start kind of degrading the cohesion of society and the ability to enforce and enact meaningful, legitimate rules that actually do help things. So, I mean, be the petty tyrant all you want, but it's at the cost of being able to use the power of law to structure a society in a healthy way. I mean, it's a cost. I mean, because you look at places that the power and rule of law is not based on actual competency or legitimacy or some kind of a demonstrable outcome, but instead it's just power for the sake of power. Those places suck, and nobody want to live there, and they don't produce a lot of great stuff because it creates a culture that's not based on skill and outcome. Instead, it's a culture all based on power, based on who has the power, who can enact it first, who's on the right side of power. I mean, it's a foolish thing. And I think the plague or the pandemic is something that brings that into light. But the thing about the plague in this movie, in The Seventh Seal, is that, yes, it shows all the worst sides of humanity. It shows the priests burning young girls as the people as the person to blame for the plague. It shows the theologians turning on all their beliefs and becoming the very depraved people that they would have once condemned. But it also shows what matters most. That's, I think, why you can watch this movie and still come away with a feeling of goodness and joy for life. Because amid all of this suffering that the movie shows, all of this fear, all of this tyranny, all of this cruelty, you still see these moments of utter beauty, utter pure human connection. And that's seen in the characters, these humble actor characters, Joff, and I think his wife is Mary or Mila or in Swedish, and then their son. And so they live on the outskirts of society, though, which might be something of interest there. They're travelers, and so they stay outside of the villages and travel to village and village. And there's that beautiful scene in the movie where the knight is sharing food with them, and he realizes that this is the meaning of life. It's actually to live and to be present in those moments of connection with other people. It's not some grand doctrine. It's not some search. It's actually right there. It's right there. And I love that about the movie. And I think that's why it's one of my favorite movies, because it brings you, it shows you the wideness of how much chaos and strife there is in life, but then it narrows down and shows you how right in front of you are the things that make life worth living. So, the people in your life, the meals you share with people, children, the next generation, just the beauty of whatever. I think he has like a glass of milk or something, and he's like, "This, I will remember this meal." I love that scene. So and I think to end, yes, the pandemic, our miniature plague or whatever, has definitely shown us some darkness in humans and our society. But I think for a lot of people, it also reminded them of what matters. When you were locked down and just stuck with your thoughts and thinking about mortality and thinking about the people that are vulnerable in your life that you care about, whether it's your grandmother or your parents or something like that, it really brings you down to earth and makes you think about what matters. And that's the whole point. That's the meaning of life, is trying to find out what matters and focus on that. All right. So that is the end of this first part of the Seventh Seal, because no, we did not get to the existentialism, and we didn't really touch on the meaning of life part either, because there's a lot more that goes on through this movie. I mean, it's the main thing of the movie, but we'll do that all in a second part.
Sounds good.
All right. See you guys on the next one. We need an outro theme song or something.
Yeah, we need something better than this.